People I didn't know started recognizing me on the street, but when I found out the truth, I was shocked. I wasn't expecting my life to unravel on a random Tuesday afternoon. It started like any other day: work, emails, mind numbing meetings, and the usual overpriced coffee I treated myself to when I needed an excuse to step outside. I took the long way home, walking past the small bookstore I always told myself I'd visit, but never did. The weather was nice, and for once, I wasn't in a rush. Then, out of nowhere, a man walking in the opposite direction slowed down, staring at me like I had just slapped him. His brow furrowed, lips slightly parted, as if he was about to say something but thought better of it. Before I could sidestep him, he let out a scoff and muttered, "You again?" It wasn't just recognition in his voice, it was irritation, like we had spoken before and I had done something to piss him off. I stopped in my tracks, thrown off by the accusation. I had never seen this man in my life. He was in his mid-30s, a little scruffy, dressed casually, but with an air of someone who knew exactly where he was going. His tone wasn't friendly, but it wasn't outright hostile either. More like someone who had been expecting a different reaction from me. I opened my mouth to say something, maybe to ask if he had mistaken me for someone else. But before I could, he shook his head, muttering under his breath, and walked off like I wasn't even worth the conversation. Weird. But people were weird. I kept walking, brushing it off. Maybe I had one of those faces. Maybe he was having a bad day. Maybe I had bumped into his doppelganger once without realizing it, and he thought I was being rude. A dozen rational explanations floated through my mind, and by the time I got home, I had all but forgotten about it, until it started happening again. The next morning, when I went to grab my usual coffee before work, the barista grinned at me and asked, "Back so soon?" I smiled awkwardly, assuming she was just being friendly, but something about the way she said it nagged at me. I hadn't been there in weeks. Later that afternoon, at the grocery store, the cashier gave me a knowing smirk as she scanned my items. "Didn't you just buy this yesterday?" I blinked. No? She shrugged, clearly not believing me, but not caring enough to press the issue. It should have ended there. Just a series of weird coincidences. But then came the messages. The first was a simple, "Hey, are you okay?" from an unknown number. I ignored it. Then another. "Why are you ignoring me?" Then another. "Dude, what's your problem? We just talked yesterday." I had no idea who these people were. The rational part of my brain tried to make sense of it. Maybe my number had been mixed up with someone else's. Maybe it was some bizarre prank. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. Because then, one night, I decided to Google myself. And that's when everything shattered. Because there, staring back at me from the screen, were photos of me. Except, I had never taken them. I wasn't in those places. I wasn't wearing those clothes. And in some of them, I wasn't alone. There were people next to me, laughing, leaning in like we were old friends. People I had never seen before in my life. And yet, somehow, they all seemed to know me. I stared at the screen, my pulse pounding in my ears. The images weren't grainy, AI-generated fakes or badly photoshopped jokes. These were real, high-resolution pictures. My face, my expressions, my posture. The way I stood, the way I smiled, the little quirks in how I held a drink or tilted my head when I laughed. Except I wasn't the one who had done any of those things. One picture showed me, sitting at a bar, arms slung casually around a guy I didn't recognize, grinning like we were best friends. Another had me at some kind of house party, holding a red Solo cup, mid-conversation with a girl I had never seen before in my life. Then there was one that sent a shiver down my spine. I was at a park, sitting on a picnic blanket, surrounded by people, all of us laughing like it was the best day ever. It looked real. It felt real. But I had never been to that park. I scrolled further, my breath catching in my throat. The timestamps on the photos were recent. Some just a few weeks ago. Some even closer, just days before. Someone who looked exactly like me was out there, living a life that wasn't mine. I grabbed my phone, opening my contacts, ready to call someone who I didn't know. The police? A friend? But before I could decide, another text came through. Where the hell have you been? You've been ignoring all of us. New number. Same pattern. I clicked on the contact info, scrolling up, and found an entire conversation thread. Messages exchanged between me and this person, except I had never sent them. There were casual check-ins, jokes, inside references that meant nothing to me. The last message from me was 2 days ago. Just been busy, man. Let's catch up soon. I hadn't written that. I knew I hadn't written that. A deep, creeping paranoia crawled up my spine. Was I being hacked? Was someone impersonating me online? But the pictures? They weren't just online. They were out in the world, taken by real people in real places. I needed to find out who this other me was, so I did the only thing I could think of. I picked the most recent location tag from one of the photos, a small bar in the city, just 15 minutes away, and I went there. I had no idea what I was expecting. Maybe I'd walk in and see some random guy who vaguely looked like me. Maybe it was a misunderstanding, a case of mistaken identity, a bizarre coincidence that could be explained away. Or maybe I was about to meet someone who had been waiting for me all along. The bar wasn't anything special. One of those dimly lit, slightly overpriced places where people either came to unwind or to pretend they had somewhere important to be. The neon sign flickered slightly as I pushed the door open, the low hum of conversation mixing with the clinking of glasses and distant music. I felt ridiculous being here. What was I even looking for? Some random guy who might have seen me, or rather, seen him? What was I going to do? Walk up to the bartender and say, "Hey, have you seen a guy who looks exactly like me?" I shook off the doubt and went straight to the bar, glancing around as casually as possible. The place wasn't too crowded, mostly small groups talking and laughing. No one gave me a second look. I ordered a drink, more for something to do with my hands than anything else. The bartender, a woman in her mid-40s with sharp eyes and a tired expression, barely glanced at me as she set down my glass. Then, just as I was about to leave, she paused. "Wait," she said, looking at me more closely. "You were just here the other night." My stomach dropped. I forced a neutral expression. "I was?" She nodded, wiping down the counter. "Yeah, Friday night. You were with a few people. That blonde girl. What's her name? Tessa? Something like that. You don't remember?" "No, I didn't. Because I had never been here before, in my life." I swallowed, trying to keep my voice steady. "Right. Yeah, sorry. Long week. Did I say anything weird?" The bartender gave me a dry chuckle. "Weird how? You seemed fine. A little drunk, maybe. Left with the others around midnight." I nodded, pretending to process that, but my brain was spinning. This wasn't just online impersonation. People in real life had interacted with this guy, talked to him, drank with him, and they had no idea he wasn't me. I finished my drink too fast, burning my throat. I needed to leave. I needed to think. But as I turned toward the exit, I heard it. A voice. Low, casual, coming from a booth near the back. A voice that sounded exactly like mine. And then I saw him, sitting there, laughing, talking like he belonged, because in this world, maybe he did. I froze. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. It was like the whole bar faded into static, like nothing else existed except him. He was sitting at a booth near the back, leaning slightly forward, deep in conversation with a woman across from him. I couldn't see her face from where I stood, but I could see his. My face, same sharp jawline, same slightly crooked nose from when I broke it as a kid. Same way he ran a hand through his hair when he was thinking. I felt lightheaded, like my body wasn't fully connected to the ground. It was one thing to know something was wrong, but seeing it? Seeing him, it sent my brain into overdrive. What the hell was I looking at? A long-lost twin? Some insane doppelganger coincidence? Or something worse? Something I wasn't ready to name yet? I needed to get closer. Keeping my movement slow, I made my way toward the back, trying to stay in the shadows. The last thing I wanted was to make eye contact with myself. As I got closer, I picked up bits of the conversation. The woman, Tessa maybe, was laughing softly, twirling her straw in her drink. I still can't believe you just ghosted for days, she teased, shaking her head. I was starting to think you disappeared off the face of the earth. I smirked. Yeah, sorry about that. Work's been crazy. I clenched my fists. That was my voice, my smirk, but I had never seen this woman before in my life. I inched even closer, close enough to hear every word. Tessa sighed dramatically. Well, at least you're here now. He lifted his glass in a lazy toast. Wouldn't miss it. And then, just as I was about to turn away, to get the hell out of there before my brain completely short-circuited, he looked up. Our eyes met, and he smiled. Not shocked, not confused, smug. Like he had been expecting this. Like this was all part of the plan. I felt my blood turn ice cold. He tilted his head slightly, studying me, as if deciding what to do next. Then, still smiling, he raised his glass in my direction, acknowledging me. Like we were old friends. Like we were the same person. And in that moment, I knew. This wasn't just some bizarre mistake. He knew exactly who I was. And worse, he wasn't afraid of me. I should have walked away. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to turn around and leave, to pretend I never saw him, to let whatever the hell this was stay a mystery. But I didn't. Because the moment he raised his glass to me, I felt something stronger than fear. Anger. This thing, this person, had been walking around wearing my face, talking to people like he was me, living a life I didn't recognize. And now he was sitting there, smug as hell, acting like he had nothing to worry about. So, without thinking, I walked straight to his table. Tessa glanced up first, blinking in confusion. She looked between us, her drink frozen halfway to her lips. Her eyes widened. Oh my God, she breathed, barely above a whisper. I grinned. Tessa, me. He gestured at the empty seat across from him, like this was completely normal, like we were just two old friends catching up after a long time apart. I didn't sit. Who the hell are you? I demanded, keeping my voice low, controlled. His smile didn't falter. Oh, come on. You already know, don't you? Tessa looked between us, her face pale, her breathing shallow. She wasn't laughing anymore. This isn't funny, she said quietly, gripping the edge of the table. What is this? A joke? A prank? The other me ignored her. His eyes stayed locked on mine, sharp, calculating. He leaned back in his seat, like he was completely at ease, like he had already won. I was wondering how long it'd take you to find me, he said, swirling the drink in his glass. I thought you'd catch on sooner, honestly. But you were a little slow. My fists clenched at my sides. I don't know what kind of sick game this is, I said, voice tense. But you're done. You don't get to walk around pretending to be me. His smile widened. See, that's where you're wrong. I barely had time to process that before he gestured to the empty seat again, more insistent this time. Sit down, he said, his voice lower now, serious. Let's talk. I hesitated. Every part of me wanted to tell him to go to hell, but at the same time, I had come this far. I had seen the photos, the messages, the people who thought they knew me. If I walked away now, I might never get answers. So, against my better judgment, I slowly pulled out the chair and sat down. He smirked, satisfied. Good, he said. Now, let me tell you how this is going to go. I sat across from him, my own reflection staring back at me with a smirk that didn't belong to me. Up close, the similarities were even worse. Every tiny detail. The scar on my chin from when I fell off my bike as a kid. the way his fingers tapped lightly on the table when he was thinking. Everything was identical. But the difference wasn't in his face, it was in his eyes. I had spent my entire life looking at my own reflection, and yet something about him felt off, like I was staring at a version of myself that had been altered, sharpened. He tilted his head slightly, studying me like I was the imposter, like I was the one who had intruded his space. Then, casually, he took a sip of his drink and set it down with a soft clink. "All right," he said, leaning in slightly. "Here's how this is going to work." I didn't respond. I just waited. He grinned, like he was enjoying this, like it was some kind of game. "You have questions. I have answers," he continued. "But I don't like wasting time. So let's get a few things straight. One, you don't need to know where I came from." My jaw tightened. "That's literally the only thing I need to know." He chuckled. "Trust me, it's not. Two, you don't get to stop me. That's not how this works." A slow, icy dread crept up my spine. I forced myself to stay calm. "What do you mean, that's not how this works?" His smirk widened, but there was something behind it now. Something darker. "I mean, this isn't some sci-fi horror movie where you find the evil twin and take back your life," he said. "This is real. And in this reality, I've been doing this for a long time. You're not the first Jew I've met." My blood turned to ice. Tessa let out a shaky breath beside us, looking between us like she was on the verge of bolting. "Okay," she whispered. "What the hell does that mean?" I swallowed hard, my mind racing. "I mean," he said, sitting back, completely at ease, "you should start saying your goodbyes. Because soon, I'm going to be the only you that matters." I stared at him, heart hammering in my chest, and for the first time since this whole nightmare began, I truly felt like I was running out of time. I felt the air leave my lungs. "You're not the first you I've met." The words echoed in my head, bouncing off every rational thought I tried to hold on to. I wanted to believe he was messing with me, just some lunatic playing mind games. But deep down, I knew he wasn't lying. Tessa must have felt the same, because she wasn't even trying to rationalize anymore. She just gripped the edge of the table, her breathing shallow. I forced myself to speak. "What does that mean?" My voice was tight, controlled, but I could feel my hands shaking under the table. He smiled, slow and deliberate, like he was savoring this moment. "It means exactly what it sounds like." I swallowed hard. "How many?" His eyes gleamed with something that made my skin crawl. "More than you'd like to know." My stomach twisted. What happened to them? He took his time before answering, picked up his drink, swirled the liquid around, took a slow sip. He was stretching it out, making me wait, making me feel it.
Then, finally, he leaned forward just enough for me to hear him clearly over the noise of the bar. "They're gone," he said simply, "and I'm still here." A cold weight settled in my chest. Tessa let out a shaky breath. "You're insane." He turned to her, looking almost amused. "Am I? You've spent the last hour talking to me. Did I seem insane?" She didn't answer, because she had spent the last hour talking to him. She had laughed at his jokes, leaned in when he spoke, trusted that he was who he said he was. And that was the scariest part. He wasn't some unhinged maniac foaming at the mouth. He was calm, methodical. He knew how to blend in, how to replace me. And apparently, he had done it before. I clenched my fists under the table, trying to steady myself. Why me? His eyes flicked back to mine. He considered the question for a moment, then shrugged. Why not you? It wasn't an answer, not really, but it told me what I needed to know. This wasn't personal. This was routine. And if I didn't figure out what was happening, if I didn't act fast, I was going to end up like the others. Gone. I had to end this. I didn't know who or what he was. I didn't know how many had come before me or where they had gone. But I knew one thing. If I didn't stop him, I wouldn't get another chance. I forced myself to breathe, to push down the panic clawing at my chest. If he had done this before, then he expected fear. He expected hesitation. He expected me to crumble under the weight of whatever nightmare I had walked into. So I did the one thing he didn't expect. I smiled. His smirk faltered just slightly, barely noticeable, but I caught it. For the first time since I sat down, he was the one second-guessing. "I get it now," I said, keeping my voice steady. "You don't just replace people. You need them to give up first." His eyes darkened, but he stayed quiet. I leaned in, mirroring his earlier confidence. "That's why you're sitting here, talking to me. You don't just kill them, do you? You make them disappear. Make them doubt themselves, break them down until they don't fight back. That's the game, right?" Tessa's wide eyes darted between us, but she stayed silent, gripping the table like she was trying to keep from sliding off the edge of reality. The other me tilted his head, his smirk returning, but this time it didn't reach his eyes. "You think you're different?" he mused. I shrugged. "I think I know how this ends, and it's not me disappearing." For a moment, we just stared at each other. A tense, suffocating silence stretched between us, the sounds of the bar fading into the background. Then he laughed. A quiet, amused chuckle, like I had just told him the punchline to a joke he'd heard before. "You're fun," he admitted, shaking his head. "I'll give you that." Then, just as casually as he had greeted me, he stood up. Tessa flinched as he stepped away from the table, but he didn't look at her. His eyes stayed locked on mine, unreadable, calculating. "You won't see me again," he said. I didn't believe him, but I also knew better than to follow him. Instead, I stayed where I was, fists clenched, watching as he disappeared into the crowd like he had never existed in the first place. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Tessa's voice was barely above a whisper. "What the hell just happened?" I didn't have an answer, because the truth was, I had no idea if I had won. No idea if this was really over. All I knew was that for now I was still me, but somewhere out there, so was he.